Our first talk this morning is going to be from Sean Rhodes. He is the Executive Creative Director at Frog Design, Frog makes super awesome things if you followed any of their work, great stuff. His focus has been on building world-class teams and creating environments for multidisciplinary collaboration and things that lead to market-moving execution. He has over 20 years experience in software production and software design, so he definitely really knows what he's talking about. And today he's talking about design talent lifecycle in a post-studio world, which, as we all know, this whole idea of distributed teams and remote working and collaborating across geos has existed even before our current, COVID-19 circumstance. And his talk is going to cover how design is scaled, gone global, and how we can deal with this increasingly remote and distributed world. So thanks so much for joining us this morning, Sean.
Hey, Val, thanks for having me. And Preet, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. This is a topic that's sort of near and dear to my heart. As a longtime designer that has, kind of come up through, the studio world, the studio system, really excited to see what happens next. A little bit about me, I've as Val was sharing, I've been a designer for a really long time, starting out, right out of college with Internet 1.0, where we were taking software out of mainframes and bringing it into the web browser for the first time, all the way through to today. I think at the heart of what I really like about the design field is it is this team sport. We're all in it together. Nobody can do it alone. When we get great work, it's really directly indicative of the quality of our collaboration. And I have been with Frog for about 11 years now, but before that, was working and leading remote teams, distributed teams, teams working in multiple locations, also a lot of years working independently and remotely as a sort of individual contributor myself, with teams all kind of over the country and all over the world. So, I think, some of what we're experiencing now, we've seen before, and there's a lot to learn from it. I'm excited to kind of share that with you. So I think, at the heart of what we're talking about today is, design is scaling. We know this. And I think that, hypothesis, provocation, that we're scaling outside of the studio, right? And if we're scaling design outside of the studio, which has kind of been this vehicle, this nest, this sanctuary for designers and creativity and design process for many, many years, how are we going to build those creative cultures of tomorrow? And I think really where some of the hints are, where some of the opportunities are really looking across the full talent lifecycle for designers. So let's dig into that. Really quickly, a little bit of history on the studio. I think when I think of studio, and many of us think of studio, we think of Bauhaus in 1926, where we've got Gropius, Klee, Kandinsky, all of these greats that are coming together, at that time, Weimar Republic, and they're really focused on a critical issues like, how do we combine the creativity that we've seen in the art world with creating functional, useful design artifacts that are going to help move society forward? And they get everybody together, all of these greats under one building. And, you have a multidisciplinary culture where people are creating and discussing and dialogue, but it's really harnessed in that place, in that location, in that geography. It's really critically important. And then kind of fast forwarding to the origins of Frog. And for those of you that aren't familiar with Frog, Frog is a 51-year-old now design firm. Our roots are in industrial design. Our founder was, working, you can see this picture on the right, in the Black Forest of Germany, in a very secluded studio with a bunch of really wonderful, talented people. And then was invited by Steve Jobs to move the entire company to San Francisco, where we were Apple's design partner for many years. And, we still maintained and built a studio culture. We have a network of global studios now. Our work has shifted away from, not exclusively anymore industrial design, but everything digital, everything connected, very software driven, very experience driven. But again, I think at the heart of what has enabled the organization and the culture that's made the team great, made the work great, has been the studio. But we're moving to this era that's we're shifting away from that. And it's starting to look a lot like this. And I'm sure many of you kind of lived this life or or something similar where, there's split teams that are collaborating across town, across the world. There's hybrid teams where there's individuals that are maybe contributing on their own and they're contributing with teams that are, kind of farther away, or a situation where you have a fully virtual team. This is true for Frog. This is true for many of our clients that we help to support, helping them to define new ways of working, especially now, kind of during COVID. But this is kind of our new reality, and some of it relies on the studio, some of it doesn't. But I think there's the central question is, as we've grown, as we've become more global, what's going to replace that role, the central role of the studio? And again, today, this is our COVID reality. Absolutely everybody is remote. Everybody on our team, all of our collaborators and partners, if we're doing design research, all of those people are remote right now. So, we're dealing with this extreme example of what we've been experiencing, and, hypothesis that might speed some of this change up that we're already seeing. So I think just zeroing back a little bit, like, why is this happening? And, hypothesis is, software, has kind of eaten the world. There's this article that Mark Andreessen wrote in the Wall Street Journal just saying software is becoming pervasive in absolutely everything and will be the dominant way to create value. Also, you sort of see that in sort of the market capitalization of the biggest companies in the world. Now it's, 20 years ago, it was GE and Citibank and Walmart. Today, it's Amazon, Facebook, Apple, et cetera. And that is driven by some of these changes. And that's where we're seeing a lot of energy. And in particular, I think that's driving a lot of demand in the design industry. We sort of see, pulling some of these Google trends on UX designer is something that's, rapidly growing and scaling compared to some of the other titles, right, on Google Trends. We're seeing service design, or we're seeing interaction designer, design researcher. They're a little bit more steady state, but there's definitely a lot of growth for UX design. We've all sort of heard this ratio, right? This desired best-in-class ratio of designers to developers, and one that we typically hear is a 1:8 ratio. So I got kind of curious about that and started to probe on it a little bit. And I think getting these numbers are a little bit difficult. So this is all kind of approximation, orders of magnitude. But we have about 36 million users on GitHub. Let's assume that's a proxy for engineers. And we've got, currently we've got, in order to match that ratio, that 1:8 ratio, we would need 4.5 million designers, right? And that's what that dotted circle is. What we have currently, and again, orders of magnitude, this is just rough, we have about 220,000 UX designers on LinkedIn today. So in order to meet that demand, the design discipline, we need to grow 20x from what it is today to have that 1:8 ratio. So it's a really tough math problem. That's something that's going to be really difficult to tackle for the industry, because there is so much demand. It's going to be difficult to do that. So we're going to probably have to, as a field, think about different ways to tackle that. So Houston, we've got a problem, right? The constraints of the studio model, the constraints of the way that the design discipline is been growing and evolving to this point, isn't going to work if we're going to go down that path. So the studio, which I think is also central to that, has done amazing things for the design field. It might not be sufficient to where we're going. So let's jump in and take a look at maybe some of the things that could change, might change, are changing as we think about that full talent life cycle for designers. And I think just a quick snapshot of what those two organizations look like. And I think we have to, as we're thinking about this, really think about serving both of these sides. Designers, what they want today, and this is what we've observed, and when we help our clients build design teams and design capabilities inside their organization, sometimes for the first time, this is a lot of what we hear, is that designers want, to do work that helps them grow and evolve, that's really interesting to them. And they also right now have a lot of ways to achieve those goals. And remote work and flexible workforces and gig economy is a new norm, and that's going to be giving them different ways to do that. Organizations, similarly, especially growing organizations, they're struggling in a really highly competitive talent market to hire those designers, to retain those designers, and to be able to get what they want from designers is to give them those really tricky challenges that designers are great at solving, and then capturing that value there. And I think what those organizations are seeing, especially the leaders in the space, is that they need a new way to approach talent, and in order to succeed here. So thinking really broadly across that talent lifecycle, and we're thinking about the entire designer across their entire journey with an organization. And what we're really thinking about are, what are their needs, what are their motivations, what are their desires, and the goal here is, if we can successfully support those things, what we can do is support great designer engagement that's going to give us that great collaboration, which is going to yield the fantastic work that we're all looking for. But we have to think about this issue kind of holistically. So there's a lot that we could cover here, but I figured I would jump into a few areas that I think are really interesting and important to be thinking about as we're thinking about remote designers, remote design teams, and the organizations that can support that to kind of capture the value of these new ways of working. So a couple quotes here. This is one I really liked by Stephen Gates from Envision. He's really talking about, and this was, I think, a recent quote. It was prompted by what we're going through now, as many organizations are really forced to shift into a fully remote world, is that, remote work really shows the fault lines. If there are things that aren't working well in the organization, lack of transparency, lack of trust, et cetera, process that isn't working, lack of leadership, challenges across the way, this remote work is really going to show that and or amplify those things. So I think the call here is a really intentional investment in emotional connection and emotional safety. And this is something that, we've all seen these pictures, right, of teams getting together on Zoom, or people sort of being really creative and funny or intentional to create those connections. And I think that those things are really important. I think when you're seeing these types of things, you're seeing a team cohesion, a transparency, and an ease that lays the groundwork for the great work. It isn't the point, it's a byproduct of that. So I think that if we're investing a lot of energy in process or technology to do innovative work, we have to start here. Secondly, I think, this is a quote from Jennifer Kim, who's a consultant that I really admire and respect, who helps startups do recruiting and talent building. But I think one of the things that she talks about is, really, if we're investing in that great talent workplace, everybody that has talent, regardless of background, will be banging down your door. If you're really known for that great workplace, for giving the designers the opportunity to tackle the things that they want to, people will be knocking down your door. And I think when we think about now in a world where we're kind of moving beyond the boundaries of geography, think about this idea of no boundary recruiting. There's a whole world of people out there that are super talented that you may not have been considering because of where they were in the world, or what their training was, or what their experience is. I think what we're seeing in this new reality is teams that have an open mind about being able to, approach, understand, recruit, attract from a broader swath of, or broader pool of candidates, do really well. And I think this isn't something we anticipate will get right off the bat. It's something, especially if we're not used to doing this now, it's something we're going to have to trial and error and get good at, but that's okay. That's part of the process. This is another quote from Andreas Marktelin, who's a colleague of mine in one of our European teams, and he talks about this process of democratization, industrialization, and augmentation. It's where creativity is going next. So let's unpack that a little bit. And I think I love this quote by William Gibson: "The future is already here; it just isn't evenly distributed." And where we're seeing this, I think, with distributed remote design teams is, with new design tools, and we're all using this currently, Envision, Figma, Miro, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These tools have democratized being able to be designers and to work effectively. to basically create a more inclusive audience that kind of removes the friction from collaborating together. We've also seen the emergence of design ops, design systems that are really helping us to work at an industrialized scale. And what we're starting to see and will continue to see is this idea of technology augmenting parts of the process that are really going to change the way that we are creating design and evolving our craft. These things that are in play, that are already starting to happen and that are affecting us, but will also be part of the remote talent lifecycle. A quote from my good friend Linda Quarles, another frog, really thinking about this idea of building capabilities to, anticipating the change that's on its way that we're already in the midst of, and then building capabilities to map to that new reality. And to do this, if we get ahead of that, we can do that without fear, if we're anticipating to be planful about it. And I think at the heart of that is this idea of a competency model that's shared inside of an organization. And when an organization is growing outside of that studio scale, I think in the studio, when we're all in a studio and we're 20 people, 30 people, 40 people, et cetera, a lot of this is well understood just with invisible social norms. But I think when you start to scale out of that space, it's important to memorialize this so that everybody understand, have a shared picture of what good looks at, like where they stand, where their teammates might be strong in ways that they're not, so that we can really be complementing one another. But that memorialization of that competency model is going to become increasingly important as we're shifting and growing. And then lastly, I want to talk about critique. And I know that there was a talk by somebody from Figma yesterday about the way that they use critique, which I think is absolutely fantastic. And I loved reading about that. I wasn't able to tune in. So I'm not going to really get into the specifics of critique, but I love this quote by Katie Dill. It's not about airing those opinions. It's about helping to get to the best possible outcomes, the best possible product outcomes. Katie's an ex-frog currently at Lyft. But I think the thing that I want to touch into is that we want to go beyond the digitization of the pinup, right? There's all of this stuff that goes beyond the assessment of the work. What happens in critique, and this is a way that many designers really grow and change and find their voice, but really we start to gel together as a community. We start to understand our relationships with each other. I think the thing that we want to challenge ourselves around is that if we're just recreating that pinup, that we would have in a studio, I think we're missing some important opportunities. It's not the same as that. That's a wonderful process and a wonderful tradition. But to look for opportunities when we're remote to be inclusive, to enable other individuals that may not have the loudest voice in the room to speak up. There are all these wonderful things that can happen in this sort of new reality that we couldn't do before, and to really be thoughtful, planful, and mindful about that. So a little bit in conclusion, I think we would be insincere if we said this was going to be easy. Change, evolution, especially like this, is always tough, but I think it'll be good. What I've been seeing with our clients, with our teams, with people that I admire in the industry is that, and this is not just COVID related, this has been a process that's been going for a while. It won't be seamless. We're learning as we go. We've seen parts of this before in other industries, software development, in particular, global outsourcing. There's meaningful similarities, meaningful differences there, but I think there's stuff that we can see. But I think it's also just understanding that we're designing the field, our discipline, for a new era that's going to help us to tackle new types of challenges and problems, which I'm really excited about. So question, right? RIP studio, is the studio going to go away? Frog is global studios all over the world. We've invested heavily in them. We believe in them. But it's not the only model. I think we're going to be seeing more and more remote teams, remote lifecycle, remote collaboration. And it's going to be one part of what we do. I think that's changed a lot for us over the last 10 years. I think for many of the organizations out there that are building big design capabilities, it's just a necessity and a reality to be able to design the way that we want to. We often hear, design now has a seat at the table. What are we going to do with it? And I think this is part of it, is for us to think about how we're going to grow, how we're going to scale, how we're going to work differently in this reality to have the field become everything that it can be. And, like I said before, this won't be easy, but I think it might be just the next big thing. And this is kind of a prediction. If we look across what's happened over the last, 15 or 20 years, there was a ton of innovations, between 2006 or 2011 around platform technology. The Apple iPhone came out, Amazon brought AWS. This brought a whole bunch of amazing changes. Then we sort of move into this next era where social, gig economy, marketplaces really started to take off. 2012 to 2019, we've got our Facebooks really picking up speed and steam, Airbnbs, Ubers, organizations like that. But they're really using those mechanisms of social and gig and marketplaces to drive innovation. I think our next round is really going to be organizations that are thinking about their orgs, thinking about their teams, thinking about their collaboration models in new and exciting and innovative way. And that's what's going to generate and create a tremendous amount of value for teams. And this goes beyond design, but I think design plays a role in these organizations and will be really important as part of that. And it's going to be rethinking not just the design process, the design lifecycle, but all of these different disciplines, different roles in themselves. But I think that's going to unlock a lot of creativity and interest. And I'm excited to see what designers, design organizations, design teams are kind of doing over the next 5 to 10 years in this area.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sean. This was incredibly informative, but also very forward-facing. It was not just thought-provoking and feeling like, oh, what are we going to do? But definitely, helps us connect a lot of the dots. I think for a lot of folks who work in studio and agencies, and I've been reading, the articles like Jule Erdhartz. I don't know if I'm really butchering the last name pronunciation, but one of the co-founders of Us Too, who had published the State of Digital Nation. A lot of folks in agencies had read about the next evolution of agencies and people working in services. I think this is what you shared today is like the perfect kind of add-on to the current situation that we are all facing. So thank you so much for that. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Preet. Thank you, Val. Thank you, everybody out there for tuning in. And hopefully we'll cross paths again in the future and we can compare notes and see where we're ending up. Have a terrific day. Be safe and healthy out there.